I've had the PlayStation Portal for about 3 days now, thanks to my friends over at PlayStation sending it. Normally, that wouldn't be enough time for me to review a piece of gaming hardware because there are so many facets to consider, whether that's the firmware, the launch lineup, how the controllers function, you name it. There are usually lots of moving parts to a new product launch. However, this is the first time that Sony's launched something that is really just meant to do one thing and do it very well, and that is remote play. If you're not familiar with remote play, it is a technology that allows you to, as its name implies, play your PlayStation games remotely, and it's been around since the PS4, and I've been using it heavily since then. As somebody with kids and somebody who often loses the battle for the TV, I have taken to my phone to play my PlayStation games at times where the TV is just unavailable. And I'm sure those of you watching can relate to that because we've all lost access to our TV at some point and we've just wanted to play a game. So for me, for the last decade or so, I've been using my phone to do that, usually by pairing a Bluetooth controller to it, whether that's a DualShock 4 or a new DualSense, and use that to keep up with it. Well, Sony has finally decided it's time to dip their toe back in the portable market. This is their first portable device since the Vita, and it is strictly dedicated to playing remotely, which in some ways makes a lot of sense. They don't have to divide their development teams up into new portable games versus PlayStation 5 experiences, and they're able to make something that kind of runs solely on whatever's on your PS5. You don't really have to do a whole lot to keep the PlayStation Portal up and running. They just have to fix bugs in the firmware, of which I have experienced none so far, but I'm sure someone out there will find a new and interesting way to break it at some point. I don't know what's under the hood of it, but the PlayStation Portal is essentially just a DualSense controller stretched out with an 8-inch LCD screen in the middle. That is a 1080p 60 hertz LCD screen, and it's missing the touchpad because the screen is where the touchpad on the DualSense would be. Now, to use the touchpad on the PlayStation Portal, you just need to tap either in the lower left or lower right hand corners of the screen, and two little tap targets will show up to kind of tell you that that's where it will register touchpad input. So you can swipe in any direction you would on the traditional touchpad, like in Spider-Man. You can swipe left to open the app and switch between Peter and Miles, or if you want to simulate a touch, you tap once to bring up the targets and then tap again to simulate that you've clicked in the trackpad. It's not the most elegant solution, but it does work. It basically simulates it. It took me a little while to get used to, but once I did, I was doing it like second nature. I wish there would have been room to put a kind of clicky, more tactile sensation into it, but again, it's one of those, it's a very minor nitpick, all things considered, because aside from using a DualSense controller with Bluetooth, there has not been a suitable option or replacement for this on any of the existing remote play solutions out there, which very much includes the Backbone controller, which I had been using for quite some time. But speaking of which, let's talk about the actual physical device, not just the lack of a trackpad. The PlayStation Portal feels pretty good. I actually really thought that it was going to flex or bend very easily because of its form factor, because it is two halves of a DualSense controller with a very large but thin screen in the middle. The PlayStation Portal is not a chunky device. It's by no means thick. It's pretty skinny. But what Sony did wisely is they included kind of a back brace. So there is a thick strip of white plastic that goes across the back of the display to give it what I imagine is enforced rigidity so that it doesn't bend or flex. I tried lightly to get some flex or some bowing in mind by just kind of turning on the controllers with a minimal amount of force. I'm not out to break the thing, but I wanted to see if it would give in easily, kind of making it to where I'd feel nervous about using it, which I'm happy to report my review unit did not. It had no give whatsoever. I'm sure that if I tried to break it, that I could, but who wants to try to break their consoles? I'll leave that to jury rig everything or something like that. But I imagine that, it would be a fairly tough device to damage. You'd have to try. And so that's really nice to see. On the bottom of the device, we have a single USB-C port for charging, as well as a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack if you want to bring wired headphones to the PlayStation Portal. On top, we have a sleep-wake button, which works just the same way as the one on your phone. It turns the screen off and on. We have volume buttons on the right, and then there's a new PlayStation Link button. And that link button is used for PlayStation's newly announced audio products. I got the PlayStation Pulse Explore wireless earbuds. That's a mouthful of a name, but that's what it is. And that is the first product that will release that uses the PS Link option. And so to pair your headphones, you just open the case. There's a little button in between the earbuds that you push, and then you push the link button on top of the PlayStation Portal, and then they're paired. It's a pretty nice, pretty seamless pairing option. I really didn't have any trouble using it, and from that point forward, all you got to do is take the earbuds out of the case, and once they're out of the case, you can play your PlayStation through them. Now, when I unboxed them, if you watched that video, I mentioned that they also paired to a phone, and I had some misgivings about that. I couldn't see them dethroning my AirPods as my go-to earphones, and it turns out that that's not really the reason one would want to pair them to their phones. What I have learned since I've been playing with both the PlayStation Portal and the earbuds is that the earbuds simultaneously pair to your phone, meaning that if you're playing your PlayStation Portal and you're listening to your games, you can also pair these to your phone at the same time so that you don't miss calls, notifications, anything like that. That you'll even be able to accept and take phone calls while still hearing your game. And that to me is a really great way to use that functionality, because one of the things I'm most nervous about when I'm playing with headphones in is that I will not hear what's going on around me, or that I'll miss an important call or miss an important text that I need to respond to. So kudos to Sony for setting it up to where I'm able to actually still stay engaged with what's going on my phone without having to just be solely absorbed in the PlayStation Portal. Now, the audio on these is pretty good. It's not as good as AirPods, but it is decent. It does a decent enough job. I did get a lot of sound leakage on them. In other words, it doesn't have any active noise cancellation or anything like that, which is a feature I've become used to on headphones, but they're still, for gaming headphones, I think they're quite good. I think they're really great at reproducing sound. I was able to immerse myself more fully in my games while wearing them, but I'm not really here to talk about those. I'm here to talk about the PlayStation Portal and what it is like. It is a really rigid, really premium feeling piece of hardware. It has all the features that the DualSense has, so you get your full haptics, you get your resistive triggers. The D-pad and buttons feel exactly like those on the DualSense, the same amount of travel, the same amount of clickiness, the same satisfying joysticks, though they're not Hall effect. They are still really good joysticks. I think that this is, it feels like you've got a controller just with something extra in between, and that's remarkable to me because the balance of weight doesn't feel off whatsoever. It feels every bit as comfortable to hold as just a standard DualSense controller, albeit a bit heavier, because obviously there's a lot more going on in there. But it is an extremely premium feeling product, especially when you consider that the price is $199, which is just like $100 more than a bolt-on controller for a smartphone. But all the build quality in the world means nothing if the device doesn't perform well. And performance can be kind of a tricky thing to measure on a device like the PlayStation Portal. And the reason for that is that it's not doing much internal processing on its own. The PS5 is handling the bulk of it, rendering the game, sending the game to the Portal, and then the Portal is just capturing the video stream and sending your inputs back to the PlayStation 5. So when we talk about performance, we need to be aware of what it is we're talking about, and that is strictly network related. And there are many variables that go into that, including the speed of your internet service, the speed of your network internally, as well as any other mitigating factors, interference, stuff like that. Firewalls can be an issue. But basically, here's how it works. When you first open the PlayStation Portal, the first thing you need to do is sign into your Wi-Fi, because you'll need to be online for literally everything this thing does. From there, you sign into your PSN account, which gets it tied to the PlayStation Portal. And then from there, you'll get a list of PlayStation consoles that you have recently connected to if you have used Remote Play in the past. And that is really important. If you've never used Remote Play, you need to enable it on your PlayStation 5. It doesn't come enabled by default. It's in the system settings, but if you have it all set up beforehand, like I have, because again, I've been using Remote Play for a long time, then it's a pretty simple process. You choose the PS5 that you want to stream from, and if you have multiple, you actually can select it from a menu, though that does become your default PS5 for streaming from that point forward. You can change it at any time by going into the settings on the Portal and choosing a different PS5 to stream from. And it is worth noting that this officially does not function with the PS4, even though Sony still supports remote play in their other ways on other apps for the PS4. Officially, the Portal doesn't work with it. I didn't have time to dig out my PS4 and test it, given the tight turnaround for this review, but officially, the official stance is PS5s only, and that makes sense considering it is essentially a PS5 controller with a screen attached. But there are further requirements for this. So Sony officially states that you need a network connection of 15 megabytes per second or greater. And that is a pretty low bar to sail under in terms of streaming requirements. Here in the US, the average internet connection is somewhere around 200 megabits per second as of 2022. And that makes us 7th in the world for internet speed. There are 6 countries where the average speed is much higher than that. Now, that's not to say that every house in America has hundreds of megabits per second in internet speed. Being a YouTuber, I have a very fast connection. I have 2 gigs symmetrical, which is roughly 20 times or something huge like that. It's a lot over the requirements for streaming for the PS5. Now, I could artificially limit that, but I wanted to do my best to find actual network conditions where the speed was close to what Sony is recommending. And fortunately, I have a family member that lives here in town near me who has a very poor internet connection at about 30 megabits per second, which is really slow by modern standards. And they were kind enough to invite me into their home and let me use it so that I could try to stream. Now, for obvious reasons, for privacy reasons for them, I didn't capture footage while I was in their home. I didn't want to bring a camera and a setup and kind of get in the way of their day-to-day life. So I did some quick tests. And the quick and dirty of this is that I didn't have any major issues playing. I didn't experience any drops in visual fidelity. I didn't experience any drops in frame rate that impacted my ability to play games. I have noticed that the Portal tends to drop a frame every now and then in order to keep the gameplay experience smooth, which is in stark contrast to my experience with iOS devices. When my connection gets slow, I usually see a drop in visual fidelity followed by a massive increase in input lag, which I haven't seen with the PlayStation Portal whatsoever. I have seen frames drop, but I've never seen my input latency increase. It's always worked consistently, even when I've tried to intentionally cause a disruptive situation by either moving around, running around with the device, trying to get as far away from the router as I can, walking into the driveway. Until such point that it actually disconnected, I never saw a point where I lost inputs, where my input started to drop. And of course, your mileage may vary. Networks are all different. But while I was at my family member's house, I was able to play Fortnite online, I was able to play Street Fighter online, and I was able to play competently in those games. To say nothing of the fact that I was able to play games like Spider-Man 2 and not have issues swinging around New York, fighting villains, doing all the kind of stuff you do in Spider-Man, even QTEs, I was able to respond to in a timely fashion and not take damage. So my experience is frankly overwhelmingly positive. Even at low internet speeds, the PlayStation Portal performed admirably and far better than my phone. In fact, the experience on the Portal is vastly better than that on mobile. And that is true in every experience I've had. On mobile, I've been able to, I've seen frame drops. It takes much longer to connect to my console on mobile than it does on the PlayStation Portal. I would say that the PlayStation Portal, again, colloquially speaking, I've not timed it, but it feels like it's twice as fast. I get into my console much more quickly, and I assume that's because this is a purpose-built device. Sony has likely granted some type of low-level API access to the PlayStation Portal that frankly isn't possible or isn't coded into the iOS app for it, but I'm noticing that the Portal is much more responsive and much quicker. When I tested the device here at home, the results were honestly mostly the same, which is encouraging because that means that it's not just my great internet connection that is helping me get good results, but I tested everywhere in my house, even places where traditionally my Wi-Fi has a little bit more trouble connecting, and I had no issues. I've played this thing in bed in my room, which is the furthest away from the router in the entire house. It's literally on the opposite end of the house entirely. I've played a little bit in my backyard. I've played in my driveway, and I've not had issues, which is surprising because those are places where I would expect to experience those issues. But I was able to play Fortnite and still get headshots on people, which is something that I've traditionally struggled with on iOS. I was able to do fine adjustments in aiming. I was able to play RoboCop. I was even able to win online matches in Mortal Kombat 1, which I can't show because we'll get demonetized. But even Street Fighter, I was able to play online at least competently. Every game, regardless of the timing it required, worked well for me. In games that support 60 FPS, I was able to more often than not get the full 60 FPS out of it. Obviously, if a game only runs at 30 FPS, that's what you're going to get on the PlayStation Portal. And if a game runs at 120 FPS, it will go back down to 60 for the PS Portal because, again, that screen just doesn't support anything higher than 60. But like I said, it is a very capable solution. Every game I played on the Portal reacted the way I would expect it to if I was playing on the PS5 in the room. There's obviously a small delay. Anything that goes over the internet is going to add some kind of latency, but the key here is that I didn't feel it. And that is really what matters more than anything. Whether it exists or not, it's the feeling of it that is what makes these experiences worse. And there is none of that with the PlayStation Portal, where I have seen that with just about every other remote play solution I've used, whether that is the desktop app on Windows or whether it's on my iPad or my iPhone using any number of controllers. I always had to adjust a little bit for the additional input latency. But with the Portal, I've not had to do that. At times, I've been able to forget that I'm even not playing locally, that this is not being streamed to me directly from my PS5 over like a local connection. This is happening over the internet. There is an added layer there, but you don't feel that added layer. And I think that's what really makes this the best way to play your PS5 games away from your PS5. So where does this leave the landscape? I think that if you're a big fan of remote play like me, and that you've used it like me and you use it often, the PlayStation Portal is a must-have. It is the best way to play your PS5 games remotely. And if you're on the fence about whether or not you should do this, while I do think that the PlayStation Portal is the best way to experience it, you can at least test the latency on your phone. You can see if this is something you'd want to jump in with by just downloading the app for free on your phone, assuming you have a phone that can play this. Now, I originally bought a controller for my phone. I bought the Backbone, and that was $100. And obviously I had to also have a phone, which we all know how expensive phones are. So I'm really impressed by the price point Sony has managed to hit here at $199, because you're not just getting a controller that you then need a device for. This is end-to-end support, as long as, of course, you have a PS5. So if you have a PS5 and you want to be able to play it while you do other things, like I love doing side content in games while I watch TV, and traditionally the Switch has been my go-to for that, but now I can actually whip out my PlayStation Portal, I can play some Star Ocean 2 or some Sea of Stars or something like that, and while people continue to do things around me. So I think that this is a great way for me to be able to continue playing my PlayStation games when I don't feel like being on the couch in front of a TV, or when I quite literally can't, or even when I'm on the road. I would say my sole disappointment here is that Sony has not produced a travel case for the PlayStation Portal, because this is going in my bag with me everywhere I go from now on. The fact that it charges over USB-C means that I can use either my Switch or my Steam Deck charger to be able to charge my PlayStation Portal and have access to all of those games that I'm constantly playing on my PS5 without having to, pack a DualSense in my bag. So I really like this option. I think it's really cool to have this, and I'm really excited to see what I can do with it as I travel more, because obviously in a weekend I didn't have plans to go out of the country or go anywhere really far away, but when I did test it in adverse network conditions, it stepped up to the challenge and it worked perfectly in situations where I don't think my phone would have performed at all, quite frankly. So the PlayStation Portal, if you're into remote play, it's an easy recommendation. If you're not, I recommend checking it out on your phone if you're curious about it, giving it a shot there. But if you're a firm believer that you should only play your PlayStation on a couch in front of a TV, I don't think the Portal is going to change your mind, because it is still, at the end of the day, a streaming platform. It is a game streaming device. And if you just don't like those, I feel sorry for you, because you're missing out, but this isn't going to somehow convince you that game streaming platforms are something other than game streaming platforms. But I think if you have an open mind and you're willing to check out the technology, you might come away impressed. Anyway, that does it for my impressions of the PlayStation Portal. Thanks again to Sony for sending this over along with the earbuds. I'm going to be using these all through the Christmas holiday, I'm going to be playing a lot of PlayStation on these. So thank you again. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you'd like to support us, just liking and subscribing is fantastic. But if you'd like to do more, you can head over to patreon.com/gvgaming or hit that join button right under this video to become part of the best damn Discord community on the internet. This has been fun. I enjoy reviewing hardware, and I hope to do more of it in the future. Let me know what you think of the PlayStation Portal down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.